Right, so we've got a score game property, a score property here attached to our cube, which we were using temporarily to keep track of how many coins we've selected. We might use this game property later on, but it will not, unfortunately, qualify as an interface, this debug visualization that we've got at the top left-hand side. So we're going to add a simple interface to this game. And the way we're going to do that is by overlaying a camera over the top of our main existing camera here. So Shift C to make sure our 3D cursor is at the center, and Shift A, and we'll add in a camera. I'm going to move it off on the y-axis, G and Y, and to make it a lot easier to line. So what we're going to do is design a very simple interface, just the word score and a little background for that, for the score. Lining up, if I go back into this camera just now, if I add in a plane to use as the background, you can see why. And if I wanted to design this as a piece of interface, you can see how annoying it would be to rotate this around and try and line it up nicely. So what we're going to do with this second camera, move it out of view here, is we're going to zero out all of its rotation values. By default, when you add a camera, it has these rotation values. So in the item tab, just 0, 0, 0 on the X, Y, and Z, so it's looking straight down. And when we look through that camera, it'll be a lot easier to line stuff up within it. Before we do that, I think we should change it from a perspective camera to orthographic, so just in the camera settings here. And then we need to have a look through that camera. Now that we've got two cameras in there, Blender needs to know which one to use. So we do that by assigning one as the active camera. We know which one is active by the black triangle. This one is our active camera. So when I press 0 on the numpad, that's the one Blender looks through. So for a little while, we want to use this. So Control 0 to define that camera as active. Just before we do that, actually, with the camera selected, Shift S, snap the cursor to selected, and we will then Shift A and add in our plane. Move it down on the Z-axis so that it's in front of the camera, and then let's go into our camera view. So we have slightly different axes to use for our modeling. So S and Y, just to squeeze that down on the Y-axis, and let's just hit G and move it up to the top left, maybe make it a little bit smaller. And then we want to add a material to this. So we go into the Materials tab, we'll click New, and if I just make the base color green, even though I've selected this really bright green, it looks very dull. That's because we're miles away from our lamp. And for the interface stuff, I don't really want to be using any of our lighting. So I think we should use an emission shader, a bit like we used on the coin, but not necessarily have it glow this time. So before we use the shader editor over here, which is perfectly fine, but it's maybe quicker for simple materials, just to change the surface definition here. So where it says principled BSDF, just click here and swap it over to emission, and then we'll make it green or whatever color you want, and just leave the strength at 1 so that we don't necessarily have that glow effect, but it's not affected by the lighting in the scene. Okay, now we're going to add some text. So with that plane selected, Shift S again. So we've got the cursor on our selected object, Shift A to add the text near our object. It's actually added in just below it, unfortunately. So just G and Z to move it above, back into camera view. S to scale it down, we'll get it roughly in position. And we'll go into the object properties for the text that's selected and change the font quickly. So under font, click on open. That should take you directly to the fonts folder on your PC. You may be seeing it by default like this. So just select thumbnails here and then select a nice font. Something that's not too offensive. Don't be going for any of these novelty fonts, please. Just choose something nice and clean. Later on, when we actually come back to design your interface elements. You'll need to be looking at fonts that are suitable for the genre that you'd like to work within. But for the time being, let's just choose something inoffensive, scale it up to fit in our background here. Tab to go into edit mode on this text, backspace, and I'm going to use caps lock and write score. Tab to come back to object mode, scale it down, and then what I'm going to do is Shift D and duplicate it on the x-axis. I want to have two separate text objects, one that says score and one that is the score. And the reason for that will become clear in a minute. We want some materials on this. So back to the materials tab here, add a new material, change the shader type to emission, white. Let's make it sort of whatever. I think this should be white. So new material, change it to emission so it's not affected by our lighting, and we'll leave that as white. Okay, so what we're going to do is dynamically update this text here from our collision detection system on our cube. First thing to do is define this as a piece of dynamic text. Okay, at the moment it's just an ordinary piece of text that we can edit, but we're going to click on in the logic editor here on the properties panel, just add text game property. Okay, and we don't want a string. A string is a string of characters, text characters. We want it to be like alphabetical characters. We want it to be an integer, which is a whole number. Floats are decimal numbers. We want a whole number. So that is now a dynamic piece of text. Right, so we'll come back to this in a second. Let's update that dynamic text field from our collision system. So back to our cube, hover over the logic editor. I'm just going to do Control Spacebar so we can look at this panel in full screen. So far we've just been tracking how many coins we've selected with our score property. We don't really need that anymore. What we're going to do is send a message when the cube collides with the coin. So actuator, and we want a message actuator. We don't need to define who it's going to. It's just getting sent off into the ether. The subject is going to be got coin. Okay, we don't need a body, and we need to make sure that's linked up. So when the cube collides with coin, plays the sound, it will update our score property, which we don't really need anymore, and it's going to send this message got coin. So our dynamic text needs to receive that coin. So we just come over here and select it. We can use the period key on the numpad just to kind of focus in on that selected object if you like. And we want to receive a message, so we need a message sensor on our dynamic text box here. So sensor, message, the message we're listening for is got coin, and it needs to be with a capital G and a capital C. Enter. And we want it to do some stuff. We want it to do some stuff with its property. So we choose property actuator, link them up, and we don't want it to assign anything. We want it to add 1 to its value. So change the mode to add, select our text property. I'm not sure why you can't rename that, but anyway. And then we want to add a value of whatever you want. In this case, we'll just add a value of 1. And let's see if that works. So to do that, we need to overlay this interface on our standard camera. So the way the overlay system works is that it will use collections, a bit like when we were spawning in our coin from a different collection. We need to group all this together in a separate collection. So I'm just going to Alt A to make sure that everything is deselected, and then B for box select, select our interface stuff, hit M, new collection, and add it to a collection called interface. Click OK. And we've got a new collection in our outliner up here with our camera 001, our new camera, the plane, which is the green background for our text, our first text box, and the dynamic text box. Maybe we could rename that score. And now now that we've got this in a collection, we can use it as an overlay. So we're going to go back to our original camera, select it, and we're going to add some logic to the camera. So this is going to be an always sensor, and we need a collection actuator. Link them up. The collection that we are using is interface. We don't want to suspend it. We want to add overlay collection. And we need to define which camera. So the camera that's in that collection was called camera 001, the second camera we added. And that might work. So if you remember, this is an active camera now. So when I hit 0 on the numpad, that's the one we're looking through, which was fine when we were creating our interface. But if we come back out, select our number 1 camera, control 0, and then press P, we've got our score. Is it updating? It is. So there you go, a very simple score interface. We'll leave that there for now.